Okay, today we're working on our Module 2, Lesson 17 problem set, number 1. I want you guys to start off with, number 1, read to yourself, talk to the text, make note of any confusions, any numbers that you feel stand out that will be important, any keywords that tell you about operations that we're going to use, numbers about totals. When you're finished, discuss with your partner. Compare notes, make any extra notations, and then come back to your video. Okay, so a taxi cab in Myrtle Beach charges $2 per mile and $1 for every person. If a taxi cab ride for 2 people costs $12, how far did the taxi cab travel? So the first thing I notice when I'm going through this is we've got this taxi cab. Charges $2 per mile. I think $2 is a pretty important number here. And this number per, whenever I see the word per, I usually think of the word multiply. So I'm going to notate that right there. Mile. We might be using that later because I do remember reading about how far did the taxi cab travel. Back up here we've got another number that might be important. $1 for every person. There's another word that makes me think of multiply. And we've got this person. So we've got some people riding in the cab. So if a taxi cab ride for 2 people, it's a word, but it still is mathematically relevant. 2 people costs $12. Okay, so that sounds like a total to me. How far did the taxi cab travel? Okay. The only thing that we don't know in this problem is this number of miles, how far the taxi cab drove. So we're going to give this a variable. And for the sake of simplicity, let's give it the variable m for mile. So let's come over here and we are going to draw a tape diagram. So we've got this piece of tape, fancy word for big rectangle, that represents our taxi cab ride. And we know for sure that that whole taxi cab ride costs $12. And it costs $2 per mile and $1 for every person. And if 2 people are driving or 2 people are riding in the cab, well, we know it costs $1 for every person, so I can take 2 chunks out of that. $1 for each chunk. $1 for each person that's riding. And then the rest of it is $2 per mile. So $2 times, because per means times, the number of miles. All right. So let's find out how many miles they drove. So let's take this amount per person out of the equation. The total was 12. We're going to take away this amount that they charged per person, so that's 2. And we get this number 10, which is the actual amount that's being charged for how far they go. So that means that 2 times m equals 10. $2 per mile equals the $10 that we have left after taking the amount per person out. You could really just look at that equation and say, hey, I know that 2 times 5 equals 10. So that must mean the number of miles was 5. So we could put that in a statement. The taxi drove 5 miles.